Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the high-stakes, behind-the-scenes cat-and-mouse game of financial covenants. Now, real quick before we jump into the weeds, this Explainer is brought to you by CertFuel. They've got a full Series 79 course with adaptive study quizzes, smart flashcards, and unlimited practice exams that are weighted just like the real thing. Definitely check it out at certfuel.com. Okay, let's get right to it. If you're studying for the Series 79, you have to know that covenants are the absolute heart of the distress lending playbook. It's literally the ultimate tug of war between the people borrowing the money and the people lending it.
Here is our Series 79 battle plan for today. Section 1, Maintenance versus Incurrence. Section 2, Crucial Maintenance Ratios. Section 3, Navigating Negative Covenants. Section 4, Assessing Borrower Liquidity. And Section 5, our rapid-fire exam recap.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, Maintenance versus Incurrence, the rules of engagement.
To understand this, let's introduce our two key players. First, we have Ingrid, the issuer. Ingrid just wants to do whatever she wants with her cash. On the other side, we have Blake, the banker. Blake's entire job is to keep Ingrid on a very short leash to protect his downside risk. So when Blake lends money to Ingrid, he uses two main types of covenants to govern their relationship. I want you to really picture how fundamentally different these two approaches are. Think of a maintenance covenant like an overly strict helicopter parent. This parent is checking your room every single quarter, completely regardless of what you're actually doing. You'll find these mostly in bank credit agreements, like revolvers. If your room is messy when they do that quarterly check, bam, you're grounded. The huge benefit for Blake the banker here is that this acts as an early warning tripwire. It forces Ingrid to the negotiating table while her company actually still has some value left. On the flip side, an incurrence covenant is like a nightclub bouncer. The bouncer isn't going to follow you around the club checking your ID every 10 minutes. No, they only check your ID when you actively attempt to do something specific, like order a drink. Or in Ingrid's case, when she tries to incur more debt, pay out a dividend, or sell off an asset. You're going to find these bouncers primarily in high-yield indentures and covenant-light term loans.
Listen up, because this right here is a massive exam trap. The test absolutely loves to bait you on this concept. We call it the do-nothing default. Under a maintenance covenant, Ingrid could wake up on a random Monday morning in complete default just because her quarter-end EBITDA came in lower than expected. She didn't buy anything, she didn't sell anything, she didn't issue a single dime of new debt. She literally did absolutely nothing. But because that helicopter parent checked the room and the ratio failed, she is instantly in default.
Okay, I want you to literally pause the explainer right now and think about the answer to this. If Ingrid's EBITDA completely tanks in September, but she does absolutely nothing, does she default under an incurrence covenant? Remember the nightclub bouncer analogy. Got your answer?
The answer is no, absolutely not. Remember, the bouncer only springs into action when you try to do something restricted. Under an incurrence covenant, Ingrid can sit on a completely terrible, burning dumpster fire of a balance sheet for the rest of time, and she will not trigger a default. What she cannot do, however, is walk up to the bouncer and say, "Hey, I'd like to issue a massive dividend to my shareholders today." At that point, the bouncer will look at her tanked EBITDA, realize she doesn't meet the test, and deny the action. But the simple act of her EBITDA dropping, that does not cause a default.
Moving right along to Section 2, Crucial Maintenance Ratios. Are they capped or floored?
So when Blake the banker is doing his quarterly helicopter parent check-ins, he's calculating Ingrid's financial health using very specific ratios. The crucial thing you need to grasp here is directionality. The exam is going to test if you actually know which way these ratios are supposed to go. I want you to group these concepts in your head right now to lock them in. First, we have capped ratios. These are your absolute maximums. Think of things like your leverage ratio, which is total debt to EBITDA, and your senior leverage ratio. Why are these capped? Because to Blake the banker, debt equals risk. Debt is bad, so Blake puts a hard ceiling on it. He says, Ingrid, your leverage cannot exceed 5.0x. On the flip side, we have floored ratios. These are your minimums. We're talking interest coverage, fixed charge coverage, minimum liquidity. Why are these floored? Well, because cash flow and coverage are very good things. Blake wants to put a floor under them to ensure safety. Ingrid, your interest coverage cannot drop below 2.5x. Just remember, debt is capped, coverage is floored.
All right, red alert, another exam trap coming in hot. When you look at those ratios, you see EBITDA sitting at the bottom of the leverage ratio and at the top of the coverage ratio. You might be tempted to think that EBITDA is a hard, indisputable mathematical fact. Let me tell you, it is not. EBITDA in a credit agreement is a highly negotiable fiction. A nominal ratio like 5.0x means absolutely nothing until you dig in and read the insanely dense legal definition of EBITDA inside that specific contract.
And this brings us to our third reoccurring character,
Val, the valuation analyst. When Ingrid realizes she's about to fail her maintenance test, she calls Val in an absolute panic. Val's entire job is to scour the fine print of the credit agreement looking for add-backs. Val will look at the numbers and say, "Wait a second, Blake. We fired a bunch of people last month. Can we add back those pro forma cost savings to our EBITDA as if we'd already saved that money for the whole entire year?" By pumping up that EBITDA number with add-backs, things like restructuring charges or non-cash impairments, Val magically creates more covenant headroom. This saves Ingrid from default without actually improving a single cent of cash in the bank. As you can imagine, Blake hates this, but Val absolutely loves it.
Okay, Section 3, Navigating Negative Covenants, otherwise known as Ingrid's Forbidden List.
Let's shift gears from those maintenance check-ins back to the nightclub bouncer. These are the specific incurrence triggers that make up Ingrid's forbidden list. These are affirmative actions that Ingrid is legally restricted from taking without getting Blake's permission, or without hitting certain safe harbor baskets. She can't just go out and incur more debt. She can't just grant a brand new lien to someone else, which would put them ahead of Blake in line. She is heavily restricted from paying dividends or buying back shares. Those are formerly known as restricted payments. She also faces strict rules on asset sales and affiliate transactions, meaning no, she can't just sell company assets to her brother-in-law for $1. And finally, there are strict rules around a change of control.
Time for another active recall pause. Stop and think about this scenario. Let's say Ingrid decides to sell off a massive, highly valuable factory. Can she take all that cash from the sale and immediately pay a huge, celebratory dividend to her shareholders? Pause the explainer and think. What is the rule here on asset sales?
And here's your exam trap answer. Absolutely no way. When a company is distressed or governed by strict negative covenants, asset sale proceeds are trapped. Just think about it from Blake the banker's perspective for a second. That factory was part of his collateral. It was his safety net. If Ingrid sells it and just hands the cash out to her shareholders, Blake is left holding the bag with far fewer assets backing up his loan. The golden rule here is that asset sale proceeds must be reinvested back into the business, or they have to be used to repay debt within a very strictly defined window.
All right, I need you to burn this number into your brain right now. 101. When you see a change of control negative covenant, your first instinct might be that an acquisition triggers an automatic default. Well, it usually doesn't. Instead, a change of control typically triggers a put right for bondholders at 101% of par. What does that mean? It gives the lenders the right to demand their money back, plus a tiny little premium. Why? Because they originally agreed to lend their money to Ingrid, not to whichever random private equity firm just bought her out. 101%. Remember that.
Moving on to Section 4, Assessing Borrower Liquidity, the short and the long game.
Bankers like Blake have to constantly evaluate Ingrid's actual, true survival timeline. Because having covenant headroom on paper doesn't mean a thing if you literally can't make payroll next week. You have to evaluate the short game and the long game simultaneously. Short-term liquidity is all about immediate survival. What's the actual cash on hand today? How much can she pull from her revolver? Are there any debt maturities coming due in the next 12 months? But long-term liquidity, that's where the slow-moving train wrecks happen. This is all about the maturity wall, the moment when a massive chunk of principal comes due all at once. It's mandatory amortization, it's refinancing risk. A company could pass all of Val's creatively manipulated quarterly maintenance tests for the next 12 months and still completely implode because a massive maturity is lurking just 18 months out.
Which brings us to another super sneaky exam trap. You have to know that the maturity wall is a distress trigger all by itself. The exam might present you with a scenario where Ingrid is completely current on all her interest payments. She hasn't missed a single dime, but she has a massive loan coming due in 9 months that she absolutely cannot refinance because the credit markets are totally frozen. Listen to me. That approaching, unrefinanceable maturity wall is a liquidity event today. It will force a restructuring well before the actual due date, even if she's currently paying all her bills on time.
And here is a very harsh truth straight from Blake the banker. Just because the revolver is committed doesn't mean it's there. When times get tough, Ingrid might think she has a nice, cozy $50 million safety net waiting in her revolver, but Blake has his own protections built in, things like borrowing base limits that are tied to her shrinking inventory, or material adverse change clauses. These can effectively shrink or completely close off Ingrid's access to that revolver exactly when she needs it the most.
All right, let's bring it all home with Section 5, the rapid-fire exam recap.
We have covered a ton of ground today, so it's time for the ultimate study flashcard sequence to lock all of this into your brain. One major takeaway per slide. Recap number 1. Maintenance covenants mean you can default through pure inaction. The helicopter parent checks the room. Incurrence covenants mean you only default if you attempt a prohibited action. The nightclub bouncer stops you at the door.
Recap number 2. Know your ratio directions. Debt is bad, so leverage ratios are capped, meaning they are a maximum limit you can't go over. Cash and coverage are good, so interest coverage ratios are floored. They are a minimum requirement you can't drop below.
Recap number 3. Asset sale proceeds are trapped. You absolutely cannot sell a factory and then just pay a dividend to your shareholders. That cash must either be reinvested straight back into the business or used to repay debt to protect the creditors.
I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Just how fast could a seemingly healthy company trip a wire and spiral into distress if their EBITDA definition suddenly tightened up on a refinancing? Think about it. If Val the valuation analyst is suddenly stripped of all her magical add-back tricks, how many companies out there are actually swimming naked? It really makes you want to read the fine print of a credit agreement, doesn't it? Thanks for studying with the Explainer today. Best of luck on your Series 79, and I will catch you in the next one.